The hive world stretched before him, a labyrinth of shadow and steel, its corridors echoing with the memory of lives long extinguished. Every step reverberated against the scorched walls, carrying the weight of broken oaths and the whispers of the Emperor, as if the very air remembered the faith and blood spilled upon this forsaken place. The fallen Space Marine moved with deliberate caution, instincts honed over centuries, guiding him through ruin and ash, through corridors where light dared not linger. Here, in the heart of decay, survival demanded more than reflex. It demanded understanding, perception, and the courage to confront both enemies and the ghosts of one's own conscience. Yet, even in exile, even in the shadow of failure, there remained a faint, unyielding spark, the echo of loyalty, the pulse of devotion, and the faint, persistent reminder that redemption, however fragile, could still be grasped. He was alone, but not entirely without guidance. The whispers of the Emperor, the chorus of memories, and the rhythm of the hive itself pressed upon him, testing every movement, every breath, every decision. The journey ahead promised danger, revelation, and a confrontation that would shape not only his fate, but the echoes of those long lost. If you want to witness the trials, betrayals, and secrets lurking in the heart of the Ashen Hive, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Every step he takes is a story of survival, memory, and the unforgiving weight of honor in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium. The sky above the hive was a muted grey, thick with smoke that clawed at the jagged silhouettes of shattered manufactorums and broken spires. The air was heavy with the acrid tang of promethium and the bitter scent of scorched metal, pressing against his lungs as if the atmosphere itself remembered the fury of war. Streets once teeming with life now lay fractured and abandoned, littered with the remnants of servitors, rubble, and the ash of industry. Amidst the ruin moved one figure, a fallen space marine, his ceramite armor scarred, blackened, and dented by battles long past. Sigils of his chapter were barely visible beneath soot and dried blood, symbols of a loyalty betrayed, a past erased. He walked quietly, each step deliberate, as if the ground itself might judge him, as if the hive itself recognized the stain of exile upon him. Servitors limped through the debris, their jerking limbs and glowing augmetic eyes performing endless, unthinking labor. They were neither ally nor threat, only witnesses to the hive's slow decay, extensions of a machine god whose orders were now meaningless in this forgotten sector. From distant vox grills came faint, broken fragments of prayers, litanies, or battle reports, garbled and hollow. He listened but heard nothing. The Imperium's reach, vast as it was, could not pierce this isolation. In the shadows of ash and ruin, he moved alone, haunted not by enemies, but by the relentless weight of memory, by the echo of vows sworn and broken, by the whispers of brothers lost to both war and judgment. He paused at the edge of a collapsed manufactorum, its chimneys jagged, split open like the ribcage of a dying beast. Flames licked at exposed promethium lines, hissing with sudden violence, and the heat pressed against him like the breath of some vengeful god. Memories surged unbidden, the roar of bolters, sacred rituals before banners of gold and crimson, the voices of brothers in battle. Once he had been a paragon of loyalty, a blade forged in devotion to the Emperor's will. Now, he was a ghost, hunted by those who once called him kin, bearing the weight of failure in every scar and every missing comrade. The galaxy was vast, indifferent, and cruel, and his exile was the verdict of both fate and fraternity. The streets narrowed, twisting into alleys choked with debris and the remnants of lives long ended. Rats, bloated and unafraid, scuttled across the fractured stones, unbothered by his presence. Corroded machinery groaned, gears grinding as if protesting centuries of neglect. He kept a hand upon the hilt of his combat blade, a ritual more than necessity, an extension of instinct honed over countless campaigns. Every step, every sound, every echo could signal death. Survival demanded vigilance, patience, and ruthlessness, lessons taught by centuries of war. A sudden metallic screech from above made him duck instinctively. A half-collapsed gantry groaned, sparks cascading across the floor. Dust filled his lungs, but he ignored the cough, moving forward with relentless purpose. Danger here was not always immediate. It was subtle, hidden in silence, in shadows, in machinery that had long forgotten its function. He moved into a ruined factory floor where furnaces had once roared and molten ores had been processed into the lifeblood of the Imperium. Now it was a tomb of twisted steel and broken servitors. Light filtered through a breach in the ceiling, falling in pale, fractured beams onto the jagged remnants of augmetic eyes, still glowing faintly. A ghostly echo of purpose. He crouched in shadow, scanning the chamber. It was empty, or appeared so, yet instinct warned him otherwise. The Fallen had survived countless campaigns by reading the spaces between reality and expectation, by understanding that nothing in the hives of forgotten worlds was truly abandoned. Every silence might conceal a foe. Every shadow could conceal observation. Memory pressed against him once more. Faces of fallen brothers, laughter, prayers, the sacred rituals now distant as stars. He felt the weight of longing, bitter and sharp, for a past irretrievable, yet he could not linger. Survival demanded motion, required careful steps deeper into ash, shadow, and ruin. The passage ahead narrowed again, funneling him through corridors like the ribs of some ancient, mechanized leviathan. Pipes overhead hissed, molten slag dripping onto the floor, sizzling in the heat of unseen Promethean fires. Every motion was precise, every step calculated. Here, the hive was alive in its decay, pulsing in rhythm with hidden machinery, teaching lessons in patience, observation, and endurance. The Fallen moved like a shadow, a predator tuned to both threat and opportunity. Listening to the hum of servitors below, the faint tremor of distant engines, and the whisper of wind through broken skylights. A ruined plaza opened before him, the skeletal remains of a transport void ship leaning against a scorched monorail. Sparks danced along severed conduits, casting jagged shadows over shattered streets. The hum of mechanical life vibrated beneath his feet. Every instinct screamed caution. Emptiness was often deception. Silence was often a trap. He crouched, letting memory guide him, not as a chain but as a map. Each step was a negotiation with death, a penance, a silent vow to endure. He paused at the threshold of another factory ruin, thick with the scent of burning oil and scorched metal. Shadows pressed close. Silence enveloped him, heavy and absolute. But the Fallen moved forward. Step by deliberate step, he walked deeper into the hive's ashen heart, where ruin, shadow, and memory intertwined, and where the first trials of this forsaken world awaited him. The ashen hive claimed nothing lightly, but he had learned that survival belonged only to those willing to endure to observe, and to confront the unrelenting judgment of both the galaxy and themselves. The air in the deeper hive was heavier, denser with soot, and the faint, persistent tang of ozone that leaked from fractured power conduits. The shadows seemed thicker here, stretching like living things over the jagged debris and broken machinery. The fallen space marine moved through the corridors with the instinctual caution of one hunted. Yet there was another weight pressing on him, subtler and more relentless than any threat, the weight of his own oath, the sacred vows sworn in the golden halls of his chapter, now broken and haunting. Each step through the ashen corridors pressed the memory of that oath deeper into his consciousness, a relentless reminder that he was no longer a servant of the Emperor's will, but a fragment of what he had once been. He paused at the threshold of a collapsed stairwell, the remnants of its railings twisted like the fingers of a corpse clawing at him from the darkness. Beneath the ash and ruin, the pulse of machinery continued, low and steady, vibrating through the floor and into his armor. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the vibrations anchor him in a strange, painful meditation. Once the rhythm of battle had been his guide, the roar of bolters and the cadence of chants his music. Now all that remained was the hive's half-forgotten heartbeat, a mechanical echo of life that once had purpose. Memory surged unbidden, the faces of brothers, voices of command, sacred words he could no longer speak without tasting betrayal on his tongue. He drew a slow breath, allowing the air to fill his lungs, even as the weight of guilt pressed against his chest. The corridors twisted sharply, funneling him into a narrow passage where the walls were pocked with impact marks and scorch lines. Faint traces of graffiti lingered, half-erased warnings in high Gothic, prayers written by those long dead. He traced them with his eyes as he passed, noting the faded words, the symbols of devotion, the silent cries of despair that had survived longer than their authors. There was poetry in the decay, a rhythm in the ruin, and he felt it keenly, the subtle reminder that even in abandonment there was testimony to life, to struggle, and to the fragile persistence of will. The weight of the oath pressed down on him again, reminding him that he had chosen or been forced to walk this path alone. A faint hiss drew his attention from above. A ruptured pipe vented steam, and molten slag dripped onto the floor, hissing as it met stone and metal. The fallen's instinct snapped him to action, stepping lightly around the hazard, armor clanging softly as he moved. Each step was deliberate, measured, and precise. In the silence, he imagined the judgment of his chapter, the anger of commanders and the sorrow of brothers lost. He had been trained to endure, to survive, to act without hesitation. Yet there was no training for this. The relentless self-examination, the gnawing knowledge that every choice had consequences, not just in battle, but in honor, in spirit, in memory. The oath he carried was heavy, not merely a matter of ceremony, but a chain of conscience that he could not discard. He emerged into a collapsed atrium where sunlight filtered through fractured skylights, faint and grey, illuminating the ruins of what had once been a hub of industry. Broken augmetic eyes and servitor parts littered the floor, hissing intermittently with released energy. He crouched low, scanning the open space for threats, noting the angles, the shadows, and the subtle vibrations of hidden machinery. Even here, the weight of the oath dictated his actions. Vigilance, precision, restraint. To fail in these corridors was to court death, not merely physical but spiritual, for the judgment of one's own conscience was a blade sharper than any bolter. Memory pressed again, more insistent. Faces of brothers he had failed, voices of commanders condemning him, the sacred rituals performed in golden halls that now existed only in ghostly recollection. Each memory was a spark in the darkness, illuminating both past glory and present exile. The fallen felt the tug of despair, a quiet, insidious pull that threatened to slow his steps, cloud his judgment, yet he pressed forward. Survival demanded more than instinct. It demanded the constant balancing of memory and action, of guilt and necessity, of the oath that condemned him and the will to endure despite it. He moved deeper into the hive, each corridor narrowing, twisting, pressing him into the shadows. The hum of hidden machinery pulsed beneath him, the heartbeat of a world that had forgotten both purpose and humanity. The fallen's hand rested on the hilt of his combat blade, armor creaking softly as he shifted, alert to every sound, every flicker of movement. The weight of the oath was a companion heavier than any enemy, yet it also lent him purpose, a subtle, unyielding strength that carried him forward. Here, in the ash-choked corridors, the ruin and memory intertwined, shaping each step and each breath. To endure was to honor and to condemn at once, and he knew that the trials of the hive would test not merely his body, but the spirit bound to the memory of oaths broken and the hope, however faint, of redemption. The deeper corridors of the hive closed around him like the walls of a tomb. Light was a stranger here. Shadows pooled in corners and clung to broken machinery with a stubborn, almost sentient persistence. The air was thick, cloying with the scent of burnt oil, rust, and the faint metallic tang of blood long spilled. Each breath carried the weight of centuries, the residue of wars fought and forgotten, and the fallen moved with the practiced caution of one who had learned to read both ruins and rumor. Every sound was magnified, every creak of metal, every whisper of air through fractured vents a potential herald of death. He had walked many battlefields, seen worlds consumed and colonies abandoned, yet there was something uniquely oppressive about this hive, a sense that judgment lingered here, not merely in flesh or servitor, but in the very walls themselves. His mind turned unwillingly to the past, to the faces of brothers who had once trusted him, the sacred banners he had defended with his life, and the silent condemnation of those he had failed. Memory was both weapon and burden. It guided his instincts even as it cut with the sharp edge of guilt. The oath he had taken, now fractured and dishonored, pressed on him relentlessly. To survive was no longer merely a matter of physical prowess. It was a matter of bearing the weight of conscience while navigating a world that neither forgave nor forgot. In the echoing silence, he could almost hear the whispers of his chapter, their judgment delivered not by voice but by memory, by the relentless presence of the ideals he could no longer uphold. A faint vibration hummed through the ground, subtle yet persistent. The fallen froze, senses flaring, tracking the pattern as one might track a predator through brush. Servitors moved below, hidden in the rubble, performing the rituals of a life they no longer understood. He crouched low, letting instinct guide him, every movement a delicate balance of stealth and awareness. The hive, with all its decay and ruin, was alive in its own way, and he had learned that survival depended on understanding its rhythms, its hidden cadences, and the shadows in which life and death intertwined. A sudden hiss shattered the relative silence, a pipe venting steam from a ruptured conduit overhead. Molten slag dripped onto the floor, sizzling violently. The fallen stepped aside, barely disturbing the debris, letting the sound pass without claiming him. Danger was a constant companion here, often subtle, often hidden, and he had long since learned that hesitation was fatal. Every step, every breath, every flicker of shadow could mean life or death, yet he moved forward, carrying both the weight of his oath and the burden of memory. The corridors twisted, narrowing, guiding him into the heart of the hive, deeper into ash and ruin, where judgment, both external and internal, waited patiently. He entered a collapsed plaza where the remnants of the hive's former glory sprawled across shattered streets. A skeletal transport void ship leaned against a scorched monorail, its hull punctured and blackened. Sparks danced along severed conduits, illuminating the fallen ruins with jagged flashes. The hum of hidden machinery thrummed beneath the ground, vibrating through his armor and into his chest. He crouched in the shadows, scanning every angle, every crevice, attuned to both movement and memory. Even here, the weight of the oath dictated his actions. Vigilance, precision, restraint. To fail was to court more than physical death. It was to succumb to the judgment of conscience, a blade sharper than any bolter round. Memories pressed again, faces of brothers lost, commands unheeded, sacred rituals performed in halls of gold and crimson. Each step was a negotiation with the past, a struggle to reconcile action with honor, survival with conscience. He felt the tug of despair, subtle and insidious, yet he pressed on. The corridors narrowed, guiding him like the spine of some colossal, dying creature. The hum of machinery persisted, the heartbeat of a world abandoned, yet not lifeless. The fallen's hand rested upon the hilt of his blade, ready not just for enemies, but for the silent, ever-present judgment of the shadows themselves. Each step brought him closer to the center of the hive, deeper into the heart of its ruin, where memory, shadow, and decay intertwined. Here, survival was not merely a matter of instinct or strength, but of carrying the unbearable weight of oaths broken and promises unfulfilled. The fallen moved forward, a shadow among shadows, a relic of honor and failure intertwined. Judgment waited patiently, but he was ready. He always had been, and he always would be, for in the hives of ash and ruin, endurance was the only absolution that remained. The deeper he moved into the hive, the more the sense of isolation weighed upon him. Walls scarred by plasma fire and bolter rounds bore witness to battles long past, battles whose participants had become nothing more than ash and memory. The fallen space marine moved cautiously, boots echoing softly against fractured floors, every motion precise, deliberate, and measured. Here, among the ruins, allegiances were as fragmented as the architecture around him. Trust had long since been stripped away, leaving only instinct and the faint remnants of loyalty that had survived the fractures of both battle and judgment. The echoes of the Imperium's order were distant, almost meaningless, and yet they lingered in the cadence of his steps, the rhythm of his breath, a heartbeat tethered to vows broken yet unforgotten. He passed under collapsed walkways and through corridors choked with rubble. The hum of machinery beneath the floor reverberated through his armor, a constant reminder that the hive, though abandoned, still breathed in its own mechanical pulse. Servitors limped and jerked through the shadows, their augmetic eyes glowing dimly, their purpose forgotten, but their vigilance unbroken. He observed them, noting their movements, understanding that even a machine could become a threat if provoked or malfunctioned. Every shadow held potential danger. Every silent corner might conceal both predator and lesson. Survival was not merely the preservation of life. It was the careful navigation of consequence and history intertwined. Memory pressed against him again. Faces of brothers lost, comrades whose trust he had failed, echoes of rituals performed before banners of gold and crimson, all reminded him of what had been lost and what could never be reclaimed. He had once been part of a greater whole, a blade in the service of the Emperor, and now he was fractured, isolated, condemned by those he had once called kin. Allegiance, he realized, was a double-edged thing. Loyalty could elevate and empower, but betrayal and exile cut deeper than any bolter. He tightened his grip on his blade, letting the weight of memory guide his caution, his pace, and his resolve. A sudden hiss erupted as a vented pipe released steam overhead, molten slag dripping onto the floor. The fallen leapt aside, letting the cascade pass harmlessly, yet the sound reminded him of the fragility of this world. Even the hive itself seemed to conspire against him, as if judgment was not only meted by men or machines, but by the ruins themselves. He crouched in the shadows of a collapsed atrium, noting every angle, every line of sight, every crevice where danger could emerge. Survival demanded more than physical skill. It demanded calculation, observation, and the constant balancing of instinct against conscience. Through the ruin, a flicker of movement caught his eye, a shadow not entirely his own, shifting just beyond the fractured light of the atrium. He paused, letting the silence stretch and press against him like a living thing. The figure was distant, humanoid, armored perhaps, yet indistinct in the gloom. Allegiances here were uncertain. Even a friendly face could mask intent that was deadly. The fallen's hand rested on the hilt of his blade, and he considered not just the threat, but the implications. Who moved through this hive? Was it a survivor of the Imperium, another exile, a band of scavengers, or something worse? Trust was a currency he could no longer afford. Every step forward demanded suspicion, vigilance, and careful evaluation. Memory, instinct, and judgment converged as he advanced. The corridors twisted and narrowed, guiding him deeper into the hive, and with each step he felt the subtle weight of allegiances both lost and betrayed. Survival was not merely the preservation of life, it was the navigation of consequence, the constant questioning of friend, foe, and self. Every shadow was both threat and teacher, every echo a warning or revelation. He understood that the path ahead would demand more than strength and speed. It would demand the wisdom born of centuries, the caution forged in exile, and the relentless focus of one who bore both oath and guilt in equal measure. The fallen emerged into another ruined plaza, vast yet fractured, where the skeletal remains of a manufactorum loomed like a dead sentinel. Sparks arced along severed conduits, illuminating twisted metal and the remnants of servitors with a spectral light. He crouched in shadow, surveying the plaza with the weight of oaths broken pressing against his consciousness. Allegiances here were not declared with banners or words, but with action, observation, and the subtle negotiation of power. He moved forward, aware that every choice, every hesitation, and every calculated step carried consequences not just for himself, but for the fragile balance of survival, memory, and honor that defined him. The hive seemed to close in, darkness pressing and smoke curling, yet the fallen advanced. Each corridor, each shadow, each whisper of machinery was a test. He carried the fractured weight of loyalty, betrayal, and oath upon his shoulders, and in this labyrinth of ruin and ash, he understood the truth of his existence. Survival demanded more than skill. It demanded endurance, perception, and the unflinching acceptance of consequence, both seen and unseen. The trials of the Ashen Hive were far from over, and he knew that only by navigating its fractured allegiances could he hope to endure, to honor memory, and perhaps to reclaim a fragment of what had been lost. The deeper he pressed into the hive, the more the presence of the Emperor's echoes became tangible, though not in the form of light or warmth. It was subtle, a vibration in the air, a whisper in the hum of machinery, a distant resonance in the ruined halls that seemed to remind him of oaths sworn and duties abandoned. The Ashen Hive was a tomb and a testament, and even here, among twisted steel and promethium fires, there were signs that faith, fragile and persistent, still lingered. He paused, hand resting on the hilt of his blade, and listened. The hiss of vented steam, the groan of metal, and the faint thrumming of hidden servitors coalesced into a rhythm that spoke to him as if the hive itself remembered the glory it had once served. It was not the Golden Throne, nor the Astronomicon. It was something smaller, more intimate, yet no less powerful, a fragment of devotion that survived in shadow. Memory pressed closer. Faces of brothers lost, voices of commanders condemning him, prayers recited in fear and hope, the silent chants before banners of gold and crimson, all converged in his mind like a chorus, dissonant yet compelling. He had been forged for loyalty, for obedience, for the execution of the Emperor's will. Now, In exile, each memory was a reminder of what had been abandoned, of what had been shattered. Yet he carried it with him as both weight and guide, for survival demanded not only vigilance, but also reflection. To endure in the ashen hive, one had to understand not only the world around them, but the moral and spiritual terrain of their own conscience. A flicker of movement caught his eyes, distant yet deliberate, casting long shadows along the fractured walls. He crouched, analyzing, measuring, and waiting. Allegiances were fractured here. Even a friendly face could conceal deadly intent. Instinct sharpened, senses alert. The fallen had long learned that observation was often more valuable than action, that patience was survival, and that hesitation in a place such as this could mean oblivion. Every echo, every shifting shadow, every whisper of the wind carried significance. He adjusted his path, stepping over the remnants of servitors and debris, letting memory and instinct guide him in equal measure. He reached a chamber that had once housed machinery of great import, now broken and smoldering. Sparks danced along severed conduits, reflecting in the dim, flickering light like the eyes of unseen watchers. The air was thick, hot, and heavy with the scent of burnt oil, a tangible reminder of the hive's relentless decay. He moved with the rhythm of the space, letting the subtle vibrations of hidden engines beneath the floor guide his steps. Even here, in exile and ruin, the echoes of the Emperor whispered, not commands, not miracles, but subtle guidance, the silent insistence of devotion persisting beyond judgment, beyond exile, beyond the decay of the physical world. Memory pressed with renewed intensity. Faces of fallen brothers, sacred rituals, the roar of bolters and the cadence of battle, the weight of honor and guilt merged into one, pressing down upon him like the gravity of a dead world. He had once fought alongside those who had trusted him utterly. Now he walked alone, carrying the fractured oaths as both shield and chain. Survival demanded more than mere skill. It demanded acknowledgement of what had been lost, and an understanding of what remained to be reclaimed. He could not undo the past, but the present required vigilance, insight, and the patient observation of consequence. He moved into another corridor, narrower, twisting, and filled with shadows that clung to the walls and machinery like a living shroud. The hum of servitors and failing engines persisted beneath him, a heartbeat that synchronized with his own. Step by step, he pressed forward, each footfall deliberate, each breath controlled, each motion guided by memory, instinct, and the subtle pull of the Emperor's echoes. He understood that this hive, though abandoned, was alive in a way beyond flesh or steel. It measured, it judged, it remembered. To survive here was to endure not merely the dangers of flesh and ceramite, but the constant, unflinching weight of oaths, memory, and devotion intertwined. A distant spark of light caught his eye, a glimmer on broken machinery, and he realized that even here, fragments of the Imperium's glory persisted. The echoes of the Emperor were not always grand or overt. They were subtle, enduring, and persistent, woven into the very fabric of worlds, into the machines and stones, into the memory of those who had once fought and served. The fallen pressed onward, deeper into ash, shadow, and ruin, carrying both guilt and devotion, oaths broken yet alive, and the relentless will to endure. In this labyrinth of decay, he was a shadow, a relic, a witness, and a survivor. And in the faint, persistent hum of the hive, the faintest echo of the Emperor's presence reminded him that even in exile, even in ruin, there could be guidance, there could be purpose, and there could be hope. The hive began to shift beneath him as he pressed deeper, corridors narrowing and spiraling in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, as if the architecture itself sought to test him. Each step echoed in fractured metal and concrete, carrying the faint vibration of ancient engines buried beneath layers of ash and dust. The fallen's senses were heightened. Every flicker of light, every whisper of air, every faint metallic groan, a potential signal. Here, in the heart of ruin, survival demanded not only skill but perception, the ability to read the hidden language of decay. The weight of memory pressed against him, a relentless companion, reminding him of the oaths he had broken and the brothers whose trust he had lost. Yet beyond that there was another pressure, subtler, more elusive, the edge of revelation. For weeks he had navigated the ashen hive with only instinct and memory as guides. Now something deeper seemed to call to him from the shadows, a faint resonance in the walls, a rhythm beneath the floor, as if the hive itself whispered truths he could scarcely comprehend. He paused in a corridor where the remnants of old banners, charred and frayed, hung limply from broken pylons. The symbols were faint but familiar, markers of the Imperium's former presence, echoes of devotion now almost obliterated by decay. And yet, within their faded forms, he sensed a hidden message, a pattern woven into ruin and ash. His instincts told him to proceed cautiously, but curiosity, sharpened by desperation, drove him forward. A sudden shift of air alerted him. From the shadows, movement emerged, deliberate and controlled. The figure was clad in ceramite, though unlike his own, the armor bore sigils unfamiliar yet unmistakably imperial in origin. The fallen tensed, every muscle coiled for action, hand on the hilt of his blade. The stranger paused, observing, analyzing, perhaps assessing threat, perhaps seeking alliance. In a world fractured by war and betrayal, every encounter was a negotiation, every glance a question of survival. For a moment, silence dominated, broken only by the hiss of leaking promethium and the faint hum of distant machinery. Then slowly, recognition sparked, not as a brother, not as a friend, but as a piece of a puzzle he had not yet fully understood. Memory surged, intertwining with instinct. Faces of past battles, sacred rituals performed in halls of gold and crimson, the relentless cadence of bolters and chants, each flash of recollection sharpened his understanding. Allegiances fractured, loyalty tested, survival measured not just by strength, but by comprehension of circumstance and hidden truth. The stranger stepped closer, revealing not hostility, but the faintest gesture of recognition, a nod that carried history, unspoken warnings, and the silent weight of judgment. He realized then that revelation was not only about discovering external truth, but confronting the truths within oneself. Guilt, honor, instinct, and the persistent echo of oaths long broken. The corridor opened into a chamber vast and ruined, where shadows pooled and machinery hummed faintly beneath layers of ash. Sparks danced along severed conduits, casting fractured light over the skeletal remains of servitors and the debris of forgotten labor. Here, at the edge of revelation, the fallen understood that the hive itself held answers, or perhaps questions, that could guide or destroy him. The weight of memory pressed harder, the resonance of the Emperor's presence, or the echo of it, drew nearer, subtle yet undeniable. Each step, each breath, each careful movement was both response and ritual, negotiation and confrontation. Survival required more than reflex. It required understanding, insight, and courage to face what the ruins might reveal. He advanced through the chamber with deliberate care, tracing the faint vibrations beneath the floor and the subtle cues in the shadows. The stranger's presence remained, a silent witness, a hint of the larger truths yet unrevealed. Questions pressed against him. Was this an ally or an agent of judgment? Could fragments of the Imperium still be trusted, or was he alone in navigating the ruins of memory and oath? The answers were not immediate, and perhaps never would be. Yet the edge of revelation demanded engagement, attention, and the unflinching acknowledgement of consequence. In this vast labyrinth of ash and steel, the fallen moved with purpose, guided by instinct, memory, and the faint, persistent whisper of a greater truth that hovered just beyond comprehension. The chamber narrowed again, funneling him into corridors where shadows pressed close, and every sound, every flicker of light, every hiss of steam seemed amplified in significance. The hive, alive in its decay, measured him, judged him, and whispered possibilities. The fallen understood that survival here was more than endurance. It was comprehension, observation, and the courage to confront revelation, whether it led to salvation, destruction, or further exile. Step by step, he pressed forward, each movement a negotiation with the past, with memory, with conscience, and with the hive itself. He was a shadow, a witness, and a seeker, walking the edge of revelation where truth and ruin intertwined, and where the path ahead demanded not only survival, but understanding. The air grew colder, thicker, almost reverent, as he descended into the lower reaches of the hive. Shadows stretched long and oppressive, pooling in the corners of fractured corridors, clinging to machinery like dark tendrils. Here, sound itself seemed to carry weight. Every creak of metal, every hiss of venting steam, every whisper of wind through jagged skylights was amplified in the oppressive silence. The fallen space marine moved with deliberate care, boots echoing softly against stone and scorched metal, aware that any misstep might draw attention, or worse, condemnation. The hive's lower levels had a rhythm of their own, one not governed by life but by memory and ruin, and he had learned to read its cadence with the precision of a predator. Memory pressed relentlessly against him. Faces of brothers long dead, voices of commanders condemning him, sacred rituals performed before banners of gold and crimson, all collided in his mind, a silent chorus that spoke as insistently as any adversary. He had once carried the trust of many, wielded authority and power in the name of the Emperor, and yet here, in exile and ash, that authority was meaningless. The weight of oaths broken and allegiance fractured pressed upon him, a quiet judgment sharper than any blade. To survive here required more than skill. It required patience, perception, and a willingness to confront the ghosts of memory as much as the dangers of the present. A faint vibration pulsed beneath the floor, subtle but insistent. The fallen froze, instinct immediately alert. Servitors limped and jerked through the shadows, their glowing augmetic eyes unblinking, their motions eerily precise, yet undeniably hollow. He observed them, understanding that even a machine, stripped of purpose, could pose threat, or perhaps bear witness to something deeper. Each corridor, each shadow, each faint echo was a note in the silent chorus of the hive, a melody of ruin that could guide or deceive, heal or harm. He moved with care, letting the vibrations beneath his feet and the subtle cues in the darkness dictate his steps. The corridors twisted, narrowing as if funneling him toward some unseen chamber, and he felt the subtle weight of anticipation pressing against his consciousness. The silent chorus was everywhere, in the hum of failing machinery, in the hiss of leaking promethium, in the faint flicker of sparks along severed conduits. It spoke not in words but in rhythm, a language of decay and persistence that only one attuned to ruin could hear. Memory intertwined with instinct, guiding him through the labyrinth, reminding him of survival, vigilance, and the persistence of oaths. Even fractured ones, a sudden echo, a clatter of metal, distant yet deliberate, made him tense. He crouched, hand resting on the hilt of his combat blade, eyes sweeping the shadows. The figure he had glimpsed earlier was now closer, its movements measured, its presence a subtle disturbance in the rhythm of the chamber. Here, allegiances remained uncertain. Even the faintest gesture could conceal intent, and every silence was loaded with potential threat. The Fallen understood that survival in this part of the hive demanded both caution and comprehension, for the silent chorus could hide truth as easily as danger, and he had learned to listen for both. The passage opened into a vast atrium, the skeletal remains of manufactorums and broken machinery stretching skyward. Sparks arced across the floor, illuminating servitor fragments and debris with spectral flashes. The hum of hidden engines thrummed beneath his boots, blending with the rhythm of memory, creating a chorus of echoes that seemed almost alive. He paused in the center, letting the rhythm guide him, each vibration, each shadow, each sound a signal, a warning, a clue. Here, in this cathedral of ruin, survival was as much about understanding the unspoken as it was about combat. Every note of the silent chorus carried history, consequence, and warning. The Fallen moved forward, step by deliberate step, following the melody woven by memory, instinct, and the hive itself. Each corridor, each chamber, each shadow was a measure in the symphony of decay and endurance. He understood that the path ahead was not only physical but spiritual, a test of perception, patience, and the ability to carry oaths, guilt, and memory while navigating the unforgiving architecture of ash and steel. The silent chorus pressed around him, guiding and judging, reminding him that even in exile, even in ruin, there was purpose to discern, danger to survive, and truth to uncover. And as he pressed onward, he realized that the melody of the hive was relentless, unyielding, and eternal, just like the weight of the oaths he bore. The corridors tightened, bending unnaturally as if the hive itself sought to test him, to judge the mettle of one who had long walked in exile. Shadows clung with almost predatory insistence, stretching across twisted metal and fractured floors, swallowing sound and light alike. The fallen space marine moved cautiously, each step deliberate, each breath measured. In these depths, survival was no longer simply a matter of reflex or armor. It required the precision of observation, the patience to read a world built from ruin, and the courage to confront the ghosts of memory that stalked him as surely as any enemy. Every shadow was a lesson, every echo a warning, every flicker of light a question. Memory pressed heavily against his mind, a chorus of faces and voices long absent, yet impossibly present. The faces of brothers lost in battle, the voices of commanders he had failed, the sacred chants performed before banners of gold and crimson, all collided in the silence. A weight he carried alongside the physical burden of his ceramite. The oath he had broken, once a source of honor and purpose, now pressed against him like a chain, its links forged from guilt, memory, and responsibility. Survival here demanded more than skill. It demanded endurance, reflection, and the acceptance that some judgments could never be escaped. A hiss cut through the silence as steam vented from a fractured conduit above, molten promethium dripping onto the floor. The fallen leapt aside with effortless grace, letting the cascade pass without touching him. Danger was constant, subtle, and insidious in these halls. Even the smallest distraction could be fatal. Each movement, each calculated step, was a negotiation with ruin itself, an acknowledgement that the hive, in its decay, was a living crucible testing both body and soul. He pressed onward, letting the vibrations beneath his boots guide him, reading the rhythm of the hive as a seasoned warrior reads the battlefield. A faint glimmer ahead caught his attention. Amid the rubble of collapsed walkways and servitor remains, he glimpsed the outline of another figure, armored, deliberate, moving with purpose yet cautious, like a shadow walking beside his own. Allegiances were uncertain. Trust was a luxury the fallen could not afford. Every gesture was a question, every silence a challenge. His instincts sharpened, reflex and memory converging to guide his path. The crucible was not merely physical. It demanded judgment, perception, and the ability to anticipate threats as well as uncover truths hidden within ruin. The passage widened briefly into a chamber where the skeletal remains of a manufactorum rose like a cathedral of iron and ash. Sparks arced along severed conduits, casting fleeting, spectral light across the debris-strewn floor. Hidden machinery hummed beneath the surface, creating a subtle vibration that synchronized with the fallen's heartbeat, guiding him forward. Each shadow, each echo, each faint hiss was a note in the crucible's relentless test, and he navigated them with the precision of a survivor who had long abandoned hope of rescue. Here, he realized, judgment came not only from enemies but from the world itself, from memory, from the weight of oaths, and from the silent chorus of the hive. The corridors twisted once more, guiding him into deeper, narrower passages, the darkness thickening until light became a memory itself. The fallen pressed forward, relying on instinct honed over centuries, memory sharpened by failure, and the faint, persistent guidance of the Emperor's echo within him. Each step was a confrontation with shadow, with consequence, with history. The crucible tested not just physical endurance, but the ability to reconcile guilt, honor, and the imperative to survive in a world that offered no forgiveness, no reprieve, only challenge. As he advanced, he felt the weight of the hive pressing closer, the shadows more insistent, the vibrations beneath his feet like the heartbeat of some immense, slumbering predator. The crucible demanded vigilance, resilience, and comprehension. It required that he move not just through space, but through the intangible terrain of judgment, memory, and consequence. He understood now that survival was intertwined with revelation, that only by facing the shadows, both external and within himself, could he hope to endure. Step by step, he pressed onward, each movement a negotiation with ruin, each breath a testament to endurance, until the crucible itself seemed to acknowledge him, granting passage only to those who bore both weight and courage in equal measure. The hive's corridors opened into a vast chamber that had once been a sanctuary, a place where servitors and adepts alike had labored under the gaze of the Emperor. Now it lay shattered, ceilings collapsed, machinery twisted into grotesque shapes, and the faint, ghostly scent of incense mixed with burnt promethium hung in the air. Dust motes danced in the shafts of flickering light, moving like tiny specters in the oppressive gloom. The fallen stepped carefully, each motion deliberate, aware that the sanctuary, though abandoned, was still a crucible of judgment. Shadows clung to the corners, pooling like ink, and every echo of his boots carried across the broken halls like the tolling of a funeral bell. Memory pressed with relentless weight. Faces of fallen brothers, their trust placed in him, the sacred rituals performed before banners of gold and crimson, all were reminders of a past he could not reclaim, yet one that defined every step he took. The shattering of this sanctuary mirrored the fractures in his own honor, a reflection of broken oaths and failed allegiance. To survive here required more than skill. It required understanding the subtle language of ruin, the negotiation of danger and history, and the ability to confront the ghosts that lingered both in the ruins and within himself. Every shadow seemed to whisper accusation or counsel, every vibration in the floor beneath his boots a heartbeat of the chamber itself, alive with the memory of devotion and loss. A distant hiss of escaping steam drew his attention to a collapsed pillar, its jagged edges casting fractured light across the floor. Beneath it, servitor remains were scattered, their glowing eyes now dead, yet their presence spoke of labor, service, and silent judgment. The fallen's hand rested on the hilt of his blade, but his attention was as much on observation as preparation. Here, survival required perception, patience, and the willingness to read the chamber, the machinery, and even the ruins themselves. The sanctuary, though shattered, was still alive in its own way, holding memory, consequence, and perhaps even guidance for those who could discern it. The shadows shifted, and he saw movement, subtle, deliberate, armored, almost mirroring his own caution. The figure paused, observing, weighing him as surely as he weighed the chamber. Allegiances here were unclear. Trust was dangerous. Even a gesture could be loaded with meaning, every silence pregnant with potential threat. He knew that the shattered sanctuary was more than physical ruin. It was a moral crucible, testing perception, judgment, and endurance. Memory and instinct intertwined, guiding him through the broken floors and twisted machinery, through echoes of prayers long extinguished in the silent, pressing weight of expectation. The fallen advanced deeper into the chamber, where a collapsed dais once held the symbols of authority and devotion. Sparks flickered along exposed conduits, illuminating the skeletal remains of servitors, the scorched banners that still clung to fractured pylons, and the fractured floor that could give way without warning. The hum of hidden engines beneath the ash and debris provided a subtle, almost sacred rhythm, guiding him forward. Each step was deliberate, a negotiation with consequence, with memory, with the chamber itself. The shattered sanctuary was not merely a relic of decay, it was a mirror of his own fractured soul, a reminder that judgment could be as relentless as any enemy, and that survival demanded not just strength, but understanding and perception. He paused in the center, surveying the ruined expanse, letting memory, instinct, and observation converge. The weight of oaths, the echo of the Emperor, the chorus of shadowed judgment, all pressed against him with a quiet insistence. The sanctuary, though broken, whispered of persistence, of devotion that had endured even amid ruin. He understood that this place, more than any corridor or chamber before, held truths he would need to comprehend in order to endure. Survival here was not simply moving through space, but navigating history, memory, consequence, and the subtle, persistent judgment that clung to every shadow. Step by step, he pressed onward, a shadow among shadows, carrying both guilt and resolve, guided by instinct and the faint, enduring whispers of what once was sacred and what could still be discerned. The final chamber awaited him like a promise and a threat intertwined. Its vast expanse stretched into darkness, punctuated by the skeletal remains of machinery that had once pulsed with life and purpose. Sparks arced sporadically along twisted conduits, casting fleeting illumination on shattered servitors and scorched flooring, creating dancing shadows that seemed to mock and beckon simultaneously. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of burnt oil, promethium, and the faint, lingering incense of rites long abandoned. Here, at the heart of the ashen hive, the fallen space marine understood that survival alone would not suffice. This crucible demanded confrontation, reflection, and the courage to face not only enemies, but himself. Memory pressed unrelentingly, faces of brothers fallen in battle, voices of commanders condemning him, rituals performed in the service of the Emperor, all converged in the stillness, merging with the physical weight of his armor and the spectral weight of the hive itself. He had walked corridors twisted by decay and time, navigated shadows that seemed alive, and endured the silent judgment of a world that remembered what men often sought to forget. Now, standing amid the skeletal remains of sanctity and industry, he understood that redemption was neither given nor guaranteed. It was claimed, earned through understanding, resilience, and the confrontation of truths both external and internal. A distant hiss, drew his attention to a collapsed pillar, its fractured edges shimmering in the flickering light. Beneath it lay the remains of a servitor, its eyes long extinguished, yet still seeming to carry the memory of its duty. The fallen approached with measured caution, letting instinct guide his steps, even as reflection weighed upon him. Every shadow, every flicker of light, every echo carried meaning. Here, the hive itself seemed to speak, testing his comprehension, endurance, and moral judgment. He understood that survival was intertwined with observation and understanding, and that only through this lens could he hope to emerge from the ashen hive whole, or as whole as one condemned by exile could become. Movement shifted in the shadows, deliberate, calculated, armored, yet not overtly hostile. The figure from previous corridors now stepped into faint light, its sigils faintly illuminated, unmistakably imperial, yet different, foreign. Recognition flickered, not as kinship, but as shared history and mutual understanding of trials endured. Allegiances were uncertain, yet there was a silent accord born of necessity and shared purpose. The fallen tightened his grip on his blade, weighing the decision to engage, retreat, or parley, with instinct honed over centuries. In this crucible, every choice carried consequence, and hesitation could be as lethal as any blade. He pressed onward into the chamber's core, where the remains of a dais, once a beacon of devotion and authority, stood fractured yet central. Sparks flickered from exposed conduits, illuminating scorched banners and broken servitors. Beneath, the debris, the faint hum of hidden machinery, resonated with a rhythm that seemed almost sentient, a heartbeat synchronizing with his own. Memory, instinct, and perception guided each step, each breath, each motion. The ashen hive tested more than body, it tested will, conscience, and the ability to endure judgment, both from others and oneself. Redemption would not arrive unbidden. It demanded acknowledgement of failure, confrontation of guilt, and the courage to act in defiance of despair. He stood in the center, surveying the expanse, letting reflection and instinct converge. Faces of lost brothers, echoes of the Emperor's presence, the chorus of shadows and memory, all pressed upon him. The hive whispered that survival alone was insufficient. Understanding, comprehension, and moral reckoning were equally required. Step by step, he advanced, a shadow among ruins, bearing both the weight of guilt and the determination to reclaim fragments of honor. Sparks flickered, shadows danced, and the air vibrated with the memory of devotion, trial, and sacrifice. In the final moment, he understood that redemption lay not in absolution, but in perseverance, in the unflinching acknowledgement of consequence, in the courage to continue amid ruin and exile. The ashen hive, fractured and spectral, had tested him in every way, physically, mentally, morally, and he had endured. He emerged not unscathed, not unburdened, but alive in the truest sense of the word, aware, vigilant, and resolute. The echoes of the Emperor, the silent chorus of shadows, and the memory of oaths long broken had guided him through the crucible, leaving him tempered, resilient, and poised on the precipice of whatever lay beyond. Among the ashes of the shattered sanctuary, amidst the ruins and echoes, he found the faintest glimmer of redemption, fragile yet undeniable, a spark that would guide the fallen Space Marine forward, no longer merely a survivor of exile, but a witness to the enduring strength of will, memory, and the human and inhuman spirit alike.